like to, now that people are here, I'd like to introduce Pieter Roos. Pieter is the president of our board of directors. He's a longtime member of the museum, and he's been researching railroads for a long, long time. He has told me all kinds of interesting things about the history of railroads. So this presentation started when a group of us decided we wanted to take a kind of impromptu field trip to the old railroad yards in Willimantic, and Pieter showed up and very quickly became the tour guide, telling us all about all of the stuff that's there. And so out of that has come this presentation, which we've all been encouraging him to do. Peter's also a member of the Connecticut Eastern Railroad Museum, and their brochure is also on the back table if you want to know what things they're going to be up to later on. So it is my pleasure to introduce Pieter Roos, and who will tell us all about the history of railroads in Willimantic.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. Willimantic Rails, yesterday and today, the changing industrial environment. So I plan to talk not just about the trains themselves, but about the town that surrounds the railroads and how it has changed over the years. Pre-industrial settlement in Connecticut was primarily agricultural. There's an example, Windham Center. These are often not today on rail lines because they were bypassed by the Industrial Revolution. You can often recognize them, the typical town green with the church and the other buildings, houses, and post office around it. Willimantic was originally called Willimantic Falls. Here's an example, one of the falls in the Willimantic River. The river falls 90 feet in a mile, which is a considerable amount, provides a lot of potential power for industry, especially textile mills and other related industries. Prior to the industrialization, it provided power for sawmills and grist mills. This is an old postcard, which I got off the internet. Shows the dilapidated remains of one of the grist mills, probably around the turn of the last century. Here's a more recent picture. This is one of the falls. This is from within mill building number 2 across the street. And this is one of the inlets to the turbines that provide power. They are running even today to provide electrical power. This is an early view of Willimantic. This would be from Grape Street. That little wooden bridge was a predecessor to the stone arch bridge that's there now. And these are mill buildings, parts of the Windham Manufacturing Company. So you can see how much change there's been. This was from 1838. Here's a Google map. It shows you where we are, but it also shows the river and the rail lines through the town that remain. They're a little optimistic. This is the Y at Columbia Junction, which is where the Railroad Museum is located. But these Y tracks are not there anymore. We'll see pictures of them later. This is the line, part of the airline. This is what was the Central Vermont. And this section here, which you probably passed coming in, this curved area beside the War Memorial out here, that was part of the old New Haven lines heading toward Putnam. So we'll deal with the railroads in 3 segments. The first one, Central Vermont Railway and the New England Central. First railroad into town, the New London, Willimantic, and Springfield was chartered in 1847. Became the New London, Willimantic, and Palmer in 1848. I think they figured out it was going to be kind of tough getting from Willimantic to Springfield in one shot. They actually started building in Norwich, reached Willimantic in 1849. I suspect the reason they started in Norwich is because it was a port at the time, and because the Norwich and Worcester Railroad had already been built into there, so I think that they could get there all the supplies they needed to build from there. Came to New London Northern in 1861, leased to Vermont Central in 1871, and became the Central Vermont Railroad in 1882. Grand Trunk Railway of Canada bought them and renamed it as a railway. They became part of Canadian National from 1922 until 1995, when Canadian National sold them to an independent operator, and they became the New England Central Railroad. They were sold to Rail America in the early 2000s, and the present owner is the Genesee and Wyoming Railroad. If you see the orange and yellow locomotives going through town, those are the new Genesee and Wyoming colors. Worth noting, the Wyoming in the name does not refer to the state, it's the Wyoming Valley in Pennsylvania. So here's a map from the end of the last century, beginning of the 20th century, showing the rail network through Willimantic area, and I've marked the New London Northern Central Vermont in red, so you can see how that line ran. This is a New London Northern train in South Windham, Connecticut. See the NLN on the boxcar? There's the old station building, and I think that was the station master's house. Interesting octagonal water tower. This is probably in the 1870s, early 1880s. A later picture of the station. They moved the water tower to the other end. House is still there. Same little brick station building. Quite a few tracks, really, for the area. Still there today, or at least half of the station is. Became part of. Yep, that's the railroad station. There's the peak of the old station master's house. So those became Windham Lumber, and more recently, I forget what the name of the business is that's in there now, but it does still all exist. Moving north or west, this is a postcard view of the old camp station. This served the church camp. Some people call it Munchkinville, the little Victorian cottages that are off of Pleasant Street or Route 32. So this would be the Central Vermont track. These are New Haven Railroad or predecessor tracks. They had their own station. This is a map from a website called Tyler City Station, which covers all stations in Connecticut. It shows where it was located off of Old Plains Road. And this is a picture I took this spring from Old Plains Road, kind of showing the area where it would be. So there's nothing there to really see except, yeah, the tracks are still there. There's the P&W has a relay cabinet, and the gravel and sand company is back in there. So, and you can kind of see when you're in the area. It doesn't show too well in the photographs, but it's a little bit flat in here, and I suspect that's the road that showed in that postcard view. This isn't a railroad station, but the camp itself had two stations. This one was on the trolley line. I don't know exactly where, but it'll be somewhere near where the camp houses are today. Now we get to Willimantic itself. This is an 1878 view showing the back of mill number 2. So this is right that behind us in that direction. There's mill number 1 and the old spool shed. It's probably a New London Northern train running past it. They only show the one track, but it's a drawing, so who knows. Interesting that they show all the smoke from the smokestacks. Sign of progress at the time, I think. Slightly later view. Now we've got mill number 5 in place. We see all the tracks. These are the main lines. This is probably a siding going to mill number 4. By the way, this is the dam that I showed in that earlier picture from within the mill. This is today the Garden Bridge. These buildings were taken out and the little overpass there. This bridge is still there. We know this is later than 1916 because this building, 560 Main, is in place. Notice the trolley tracks running across the bridge. Don't know if anybody remembers driving across that bridge. It was pretty scary when you met something coming the other way. Can you imagine meeting this coming the other way? The trolley heading north into town across that bridge. There's mill number 5. And this is where mill number 2 is. And here's the same bridge. This is the photographs from the internet. The photographer said it was 1990. Grand Trunk Diesels, Central Vermont, Grand Trunk of Maine, and the Duluth, Winnipeg, and Pacific were all owned subsidiaries of Canadian National. They shared power in the diesel era. So you can see the old bridge. That's Hartford Whalers, hey. The Union Station. Called the Union Station because more than one railroad stopped at it. In this case, the Central Vermont and the New York, New Haven, and Hartford. You might recognize this building. That still exists, as do some of these. Station, was the second station. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Lasted until 1955. Central Vermont passenger train, this is probably around 1900, judging by the design of the locomotive. There's the station, it's lost its cupola. There's the footbridge and that building. You can see the courthouse tower, the Capitol Theater. The
tracks there than there were, right? There's more tracks now, more tracks there in that picture than there are now. Am I correct?
Yes, there were a lot more. There used to be the gas holders over here, the coal gas company. The train we saw in the last view was a local. It had one locomotive on the front, so it was serving the industries in the area. This is probably a through train from Palmer south to New London. Notice the double-headed locomotives. That was to get over the hill near state line between Massachusetts and Connecticut. There's the station building. This is a water plug, so the steam locomotives could get water. Again, you notice most of these buildings are still there if you go down. This, of course, this is the parking area now. Canadian National diesels, heading a train northbound, probably from New London. Central Vermont dieselized late. New Haven railroads switched to diesels about 1950. Central Vermont was still running steam in 1957. And most of their early diesel trains were powered by their parent Canadian National units. Jim Boyd, the late editor of Railroad and Railfan magazine, said that they were the only Class 1 railroad to dieselize with somebody else's locomotives. Here we are a little later, 1970s, Central Vermont train heading north. Here's an early P&W train with their RS3 on the head. What's that?
No station.
No, the station was gone by 55. So most of this is still pretty similar looking today. You see the little pump house and stuff. One of the gas company buildings was still there at this time. This was 1979.
So when did passenger service stop?
So the Central Vermont stopped passenger service in the 30s, but the New Haven kept going until about 55 when the line to Putnam washed out. 1981. See, they've all started tearing down the buildings that were behind the station. This is the second to the last Central Vermont paint scheme to EMD GP9s. Moving on to Grape Street. This is the last paint scheme and the last units that Central Vermont owned. GP38s, also electromotive engines. This one ran trunk markings, passing the stone house and the courthouse.
There was 2 tracks crossing Bridge Street at one time, wasn't there?
Yes. Yes, there were. So the we'll see later on the signal that was there. Both the New Haven line and the Central Vermont line crossed there. Here's the same train heading past what we call the Brick Row, these houses back here. So this is west or north of Bridge Street. And here's the couple of the buildings from the Railroad Museum, which at that time were located out there. Now that's the entrance driveway to the museum. $1995, and the New England Central acquires the line. They buy some GP38s themselves, ex-Gulf Mobile and Ohio units. This is a train southbound heading toward New London. And you can see the Railroad Museum has purchased or acquired the Groton Freight House and a New Haven passenger car. This, of course, is now all paved. There's considerable change in this area. Plus the Railroad Museum buildings moved back into the museum grounds. When Rail America took over, we started seeing a wild variety of power. So here's a Rail America unit, TP&Ws, Toledo, Peoria, and Western. That's been running around for a while. It's a GP40, probably Canadian with a wide cab. And this unit in Union Pacific paint, NECR 2681, much bigger unit than anybody ever ran on those lines before. Back to Bridge Street, another New England Central train. Again, 2 units, Union Pacific paint. This one has lettered for the Florida East Coast Railroad, so they haven't even repainted that lettering yet. Here are 2 General Electric lease units behind that, so 4 diesels on a train heading north through Willimantic. Then the latest thing to see is the Genesee and Wyoming scheme. This is a photo by Rail Museum member Bob LeMay. Shows the orange and the yellow and black scheme. Still one of the original New England Central units, bringing up the back. This is a unit that was around here for a little while. It's called a road slug. It's got no diesel engine. It just has the electric motors to add power. And here's a picture from this spring of another Genesee and Wyoming subsidiary unit in the yard. I have to figure out what the CS stands for. Might be Connecticut Southern, because they were one of the lines that they've taken over. So now we're going to transition a little bit from the Central Vermont to the New Haven. So to illustrate the transition, here's a shot. Central Vermont, 280, heading north, or pointed north. I don't know if that he's moving at the moment. These are New Haven units, American Locomotive Company DL109, dual-purpose diesels. This would have been in the late 40s, early 50s. This is by Bridge Street, the freight house. We'll see more of that later. And this is, judging by all the people wandering around, it's a fan trip on the New Haven. So one of the 2 lines from the New Haven was the airline, which you've all heard of from the Airline Trail. Began as the New York and Boston, became the Boston, Hartford, and Erie. Joined with the New Haven, Middletown, and Willimantic Railroad, which built from Middletown toward Willimantic and reached it in 1873, so rather late. Boston became the Boston and New York Airline in 1875. Leased by the New Haven in 1882. Putnam washed out in 1955, which kind of ended service there. Abandoned by the Penn Central in 1969. acquired by the state of Connecticut and became a rail trail in 1976. Just within the past 2 years, it was upgraded quite a bit. So here we are with this map again. Red line, still the central Vermont, or New London Northern. And here's the airline route in yellow. Actually, it probably continues up that way. I got tired of trying to draw the yellow over it. New Haven, Middletown, and Willimantic passenger coach number 3. About the only picture I found dating from that era. About 1870. So as you saw, that was one of the predecessors to the airline. Probably the most famous train to run through Willimantic, the White Train, otherwise known as the Ghost Train. Ran from Boston to New Haven. The coaches were all painted white. The story is that when it passed in the evening through the fields, that people thought it looked ghostly. You'll see some references that say, oh, even the coal in the locomotives was painted white. Well, I've never seen the locomotives not be black, so I doubt that they bothered painting the coal. Willimantic was an important stopping place for the train. It had a diner between Boston and Willimantic in both directions, so the diner was dropped off here in Willimantic Yard and then put onto the northbound train to head on to Boston again. You can see it today here on the side of A Cupcake for Later. They've painted this mural.
No, that's on.
Yeah, it says Cupcake for Later. There's their sign. So that's a pretty cool reminder of the old days in Willimantic.
Was that supposed to be later on? They had heavy rains and I was concerned about trying to, I guess, make a line like the viaduct building, I guess. So the early part, I guess, was not as heavy as what the locomotives got later on.
You mean why they filled them in? Partly for weight and partly just so they wouldn't have to maintain the steel work. Yeah, once you fill it, then you don't have to worry about the steel work being painted to keep it from rusting. Okay, moving on. Railroads, Willimantic, the New Haven and P&W. Started as a Hartford, Providence, and Fishkill. Reached Willimantic in 1849 from Hartford. Came Boston, Hartford, and Erie, then New York and New England. New Haven, Penn Central until 1969, or in 1969. Penn Central decided they didn't have to continue paying the Providence and Worcester stockholders for the lease. So Providence and Worcester stockholders sued and got control of their railroad back after about 100 years. 1973, they became a real railroad again and started running equipment, including into town. Stopped for a while in the late 70s, early 80s because there weren't enough customers, but then they came back in the 90s and were taken over by Genesee and Wyoming in December of last year. So we're back to only one railroad line through town, even though they have 2 different lines.
Now, both those lines are used, I mean,
Yes.
south of it.
Yeah, because they go to different areas. So the green line represents the part that became parts of Providence and Worcester, not all of it. Let's see. So this was the Hartford, Providence, and Fishkill, Boston, Hartford, and Erie, Boston, New York. The airline was different. Okay, here's the station in 1848 with a I-1 class Pacific engine number 1300 leading a train toward Boston. So this is the, we'll see more pictures of this. That was the Railway Express Agency building, Capitol Theater. Another rail fan excursion at the station. There's a little diesel switcher, which is the regular power in the yard. See the footbridge, this building, which is still there, but now covered with concrete. This little pump house is still there, so you can see those parts. A lot fewer tracks, these buildings aren't here, this building is not there. A lot of changes.
What year is that?
This was about 1948. The early 50s, the then president of the New Haven Railroad, Frederick C. Domain, wanted to continue or even expand passenger service on marginal lines. So he was exploring different forms of self-propelled transportation, including this little Mack rail bus. It's pretty much a city bus with railroad wheels on it. So this was the prototype. They bought 10 other units. By the time they were delivered, he was no longer president. Patrick McGinnis wasn't interested in that. They ran for a year or two out in Rhode Island and then disappeared. There's another form, RDC car. These were popular all over the country. You see there's 3 of them. This one is a mail baggage. There's the REA building and 2 REA trucks by it. Here's a Central Vermont train northbound with 2 Canadian National Diesels on the front. There's the gas company. So this would be early 50s, like 52, 53. New Haven passenger train heading to Boston. This is west of Bridge Street. There's the signal that stood there. This is the gas station, which is now the rental car place across from Dairy Queen. Looking west again from Bridge Street, there's the signal. Here's a New Haven passenger train, 3 cars. The smoke is from a Central Vermont freight that's steam powered, that's sitting behind it. You can't see the locomotive behind the New Haven train. Freight house, old Windham Manufacturing Company mill buildings. In 1969, New Haven is forced to become part of Penn Central. This is a former New Haven Alco RX-11, Penn Central paint. Some real fans who aren't real fond of the Penn Central called it 13D black, stood for dull, dreary, depressing, etc. And of course, this building is the one that we talked about, still there. Doesn't really look the same though. So this is south of the footbridge. Providence and Worcester train, that's the same building we were just talking about. So this is a Montreal Locomotive Works, MLW 420. Providence and Worcester wanted to move up from their used Alco-motive power that they had acquired and wanted to buy new locomotives. They couldn't get any of the American locomotive builders to give them credit, but the Canadians would. So they got 5 of these. They were the first units in North America with what's called the comfort cab, a wider nose, which is common to most rail lines now. But they were the first just because they got the engines from Canada. Looking from the footbridge, of significance, this boxcar is at the Railroad Museum. And this little ruin over here, we'll see some pictures of later. That was the Willimantic section house. That's now at the museum. You can see the mill buildings from American Thread. Here's mill number 2 way down there. This is the back of what was most recently Abracadabra. That was a feed company, Agway most recently, before it started becoming restaurants. Here's a 2012 Railfan excursion on the P&W. This is at Grape Street. This concrete platform was the Amtrak station that was built there in the 80s, when Amtrak briefly switched over to us. See, they still have the wide cabs on some of this power, because that's the modern so-called comfort cab. Now, how many people knew there was a narrow gauge railroad in Willimantic? Yep.
Started
There, one locomotive, the Helen B, named for Helen Boss, the daughter of the mill manager. It's standing in front of the tower of mill number 1, which is the stone building on the other side of the Garden Bridge. This is a picture from the mural that's in the parking lot across the street. You can go down there and see that if you want, obviously taken from that photograph.
Is that where they have the arch tall?
Yes. This is actually a label from Willimantic Linen Company thread, but it's interesting. It shows mill number 2, old mill number 4, mill number 3, which was down in Rec Park. You can still see the foundations. Shows the narrow gauge train crossing the iron bridge over to mill number 4.
So it's not the scale, just.
It's not, it's, yeah, the geography is a little bit off to fit it all in, but it's just interesting that they chose to include the train in it. Mill number 2, here's the mill building next door. There's the L&B pulling a little flat car. You can see what's the parking lot now was at this point an open field. There's mill number 4 in the background. And here's the train heading toward the little tunnel and toward mill number 1, the school shop. And there's the tunnel today. I took that picture just like a week ago, so you can easily go through, walk through it, part of our space. View from the other side, there's mill number 1, there was mill number 5 and mill number 6, that's Main Street. And the Garden Bridge is there. Notice the 3 rails in each of these tracks. So they're dual gauge. The narrow gauge can run on them and so can the standard gauge. And in here the narrow gauge branches off by itself. And here's another view of the same thing. So there's the 2 dual gauge tracks in the yard, New Haven Railroad boxcar. Little narrow gauge track runs over here to this little boiler house. Looks like a little car carrying, I'm not sure what, wood or maybe cotton. All of this is now underneath 560 Main.
Is that a trolley line in the back?
Yep, there's the trolley line. Here's a trolley car that's probably just come north across the Garden Bridge. You can see when I grew up, I always thought this was one building back here, 5 and 6, because they walled them together. But there was actually space in between, and narrow gauge ran right through that. We have insurance maps here in the museum that show, the trackage in there. They had some little sidings where they could drop off cars to move stuff from one mill to the other.
They used to move coal from pole number 4, they had a pole picking that big off of the, I think Providence or Worcester, they used to move coal up to the boiler up here.
Okay, so that may be what this car is for, although it doesn't seem to have coal in it at the moment. Be interesting to find out what happened to all that narrow gauge equipment. Did they just scrap it? Did it go somewhere? Probably scrap, but.
Well, the track is there, from what I can see. None of the track is there, not at all.
No, well, could be under the pavement, but probably not. Okay, now we're just gonna kind of sweep from the south to the north. There's mill number 4. So, so unlike the other mills, it's kind of flat and broad. It was the first mill building built in the country, built to be illuminated by electric light. So the other mill buildings, like across the street, are tall and narrow, so you can get sunlight in through the windows to the center of the building, but they didn't have to be concerned with that. Started out with arc lighting and then went to Edison lighting. Remember the dates on that, Jamie?
1879 is when they converted the stone building number 2 to electricity with arc lights, and then in 1880, Edison came and installed the incandescent bulbs, and later in 1880 they began construction of number 4.
Okay. And unfortunately, it burned down in 1995. We have a print at the museum that we sell of a part of the interior of that building. This is Union Street, right out here, and Jackson Street.
Did you say 1995 or 1895?
1995 it burned. So, I never got to see it unfortunately because but I could have. I mean, because obviously I grew up here, I could have easily seen it. So this is about 1940. These two houses are still here. They're at the other end of the street. Probably past them coming in here. And this is the curve that goes past that's the like parking area for the little houses. You can see it was double tracked. There's a hopper car sitting on a side track. I'm not quite sure what this building is. Clearly all of this is, that you see here, except for these houses, is gone. Stepping back a little, this is Main Street. So the part of Union Street that's now the parcel is over there. Interesting little elevated crossing shanty. So this would have had the guy who controlled all these gates. So we could see trains coming along the track in either direction. So now we're back down in the yard. This is the bridge that crosses the river from the yard. Boiler house, bridge and building department office for the New Haven Railroad, water tower. The section house will be over here. There's the steeple of the Baptist church that's right over here, like a parking lot. And there's that brick and concrete office building. We tramped through this area looking for remains when we were doing the tour Jamie was talking about, and we couldn't really find anything, foundations or anything else that were left on it's pretty well grown in. The section house, this is sometime in the 60s I took this picture, my little Instamatic camera. This building has now been reconstructed at the museum. Basically we got the framework and re-sided it. So here's a view looking toward those buildings. This was in 1988 from the footbridge. So there's what was left of the section house. You can see, look right through the walls. Bridge and building department building was still sort of there. Probably wouldn't want to walk into it. These tracks are now gone. There's the old Agway, now most recently Abracadabra. There's that brick and concrete building. You can see even here evidence of changes. Notice these longer ties. So there was a switch in here and more track leading out this way at some point. Here's a photo from the 90s. Those are the same two bridges. You can see where the boiler house would have been. It's all trees now. Providence and Worcester Freight heading south. This was the first station in Willimantic. This was built in the 1850s. Served both the New London Northern and the Hartford, Providence, and Fishkill, or Boston, Hartford, and Erie trains. This was a little to the south of where the footbridge is, and right between the tracks. So people actually had to walk across the railroad track to get to it. And there were letters of complaint to officials in the railroad and the government saying, you know, this is unacceptable, someone's going to get killed, why are we doing this? The railroads didn't want to do anything about it. There was also a roundhouse and a turntable in the south part of town. You can see the front of it down there next to a locomotive. This is the only picture I ran into of this first station.
In the south part of town, you mean south of Bridge Street?
Yeah, so, well, really south. So this is, I mean, those bridges we were just looking at crossing the river would be over in here someplace.
Footbridge and the river.
Yeah, yeah. So this is kind of those other tracks that making the curve would be over here. So this is in between the two sets of tracks where they diverge at the south part of town. I got an overhead view that shows this.
The station was built by the railroad then, not by the town,
Correct.
even though it served two different railroads.
Yeah, one of the railroads built it, and rented space or shared space for some consideration with the other railroad. So here's a better illustration, an overhead view. So there's Railroad Street. There's the station building, the tracks on both sides. Here's the roundhouse, and here's the bridge across the Willimantic River. And those are the tracks that curve up alongside Jackson Street.
Whatever happened to that roundhouse? That's not the one.
It's not the one ours is at the north end. There's a freight house. Interestingly, they don't show any tracks going to it, but there must have been some. So the footbridge goes across right here, but that didn't come until 1906. There's the gas company, the gas holders. So they were there early. Hmm. 1898, Company E leaving Willimantic for the Spanish-American War. This is probably the roof of the roundhouse that the photographer's standing on. But we got the second station building. Bunch of stuff over here, probably a coal yard. Yeah, as you can see, no footbridge yet. This building is there still today. There's the courthouse. We don't have the Capitol Theater or even the grain company building that's there now. This car was pretty old with this monitor type roof. That was probably pretty old even in 1898. It's like an 1860s, 1870s era car. Here's the footbridge, probably around 1910, built in 1906. Let's see, we're facing the New Haven Railroad Yard. Of the buildings in this view, only the footbridge remains. The footbridge is quite well known. It's supposedly the only bridge crossing a road, a railroad, and a river east of the Mississippi. It's 635 feet long. There was quite a fight about whether to build it or not among the townsmen. Here's a 1940s view of the bridge. By the 1970s, that area of town was considered a little bit seedy. Of course, we know what it looks like today. So here's an insurance map. There's the station and the express building. Here's Windham Lumber and Coal Company, coal sheds and building. Here's the gas company. You can see there were two sidings here. Insurance maps generally don't guarantee that you see all the tracks. They weren't all that interested, except if they were next to a building that they were insuring. Busy day at the station. The Reverend F.X. Mulville's funeral in March of 1906. So the footbridge must be pretty new at that point. See, there were some sidings over here where they dropped freight cars.
At one time, they had something like 40 passenger trains a day coming into Willimantic.
Yeah, I keep meaning to look up the exact numbers, but yes, there were 40 or 50 trains a day at the time.
What years was that?
Probably around 1900.
Around 1900, turn the century.
You know, you got to keep in mind, until the automobile becomes common before World War II, that was the only way you were going to get anywhere. So this was a major deal. As Steve mentioned back here, train waiting to come in. This is a train order signal. Tells the train to stop to get orders from the operator in the station. Interestingly, I don't see the water plug, so apparently they weren't here yet. Here's a view from the 1930s. Pretty busy with the express business. Quite a few people too. A little quieter time, somewhere near the end in the 1950s. You know, of course, the cupola is long gone. Still two trucks, REA trucks, waiting by the express building. So must have been still doing a lot of business there. This is right west of the station. That's part of the station roof there. Baggage office, express building, little freight office. You can see one of those sidings ends here. There's a ballpark at the end of the track to stop the cars. This is the only view I found of the other side of the station. A few cross arms on this pole. So this is the express building. That's the cupola of the station. There's the footbridge. This building is the one that's still there, still has those fire escapes on it. So you can pretty well see right where this is if you walk down by past the footbridge into the parking area. Willimantic Lumber and Coal Yard. This is from threadcity.org. So there's the footbridge. This is, I believe, looking south toward it. Okay, this is a picture looking north from the footbridge, about 1988. There's the remains of those coal sheds. So they were still there. When we were down the yard, all of this area now is grown in. The track is missing. Probably could still find the drop off if we looked for it to go to the coal yard, but there's nothing left of this. The gas holders are gone, but this building that was part of the gasworks was still there, but it's not anymore. There's just concrete flat areas fenced off. There's the grain company that showed up in some of the pictures. There's the Capitol Theater, the courthouse. Moving a little further north, here's another fan trip behind an I-4 class Pacific on the New Haven. There's the Gasworks buildings. And that's the one that was showing as white in that other picture, I think. There's the footbridge. This is about 1948, 49 again. That's from inside the gasworks. There's what they call the stone row behind Main Street. This side of Bridge Street to place this. And that's the Capitol Theater, I believe, there. So this looks like they were doing some rework inside the gasworks and wanted to document it. This is, you can find this picture also on Thread City. And here we have the windmill signal or the gallows signal. This is Grape Street. That's the stone house that's there. There's the Capitol Theater in the background. Place it. This was Windham Manufacturing Company Mills. Picture was taken in 1936. The signal bridge itself was built in 1854 and remained in service until at least the 1950s, possibly the early 60s. This is at the Railroad Museum where we have built a reproduction of that signal. So you can see that if you go visit. Explanation of what the indications showed, who they gave precedence to is on it. This is two of our locomotives, the FL9 and the CB Alco S4, posed for a photo shoot. Back to Bridge Street, here's the crossing tenders shanty. Freight house, we saw a view from the platform earlier. The Windham Manufacturing Mill buildings. None of that's, there's the gas station that's now the rent-a-car place. So this is standing in the parking lot in front of that old stone house that's still there by Bridge Street.
Back in the 1938 hurricane, I was under 2 feet of water.
Yes, yeah, there's some photographs of that. So here we are on top of the Windham Manufacturing, looking kind of east. There's the courthouse. This is before 1910 because there's no post office. There's the grain company, but there's no Capitol Theater. There's the freight house, the signal. See, this was all open at the time. This is where Whitewater is now, this building.
So what was that?
That was part of the Windham manufacturing mills.
Is that little curvature, is that like, down to the bottom, the curve there, down over, yeah, that, what is that?
That's a good question.
I wonder if that was part of the,
I think it's just like a driveway. Maybe.
oh, okay.
Yeah, the narrow gauge didn't come down to here.
Oh, didn't go, okay.
Another view of the freight house. You might recognize this building because it's still there, but the rest of it isn't.
Is that offices?
Yep. So here's another view of it. This is from 1924. Things are pretty busy. Look at all the boxcars there. Little Model T Express truck. So apparently this building was originally part of these mills, and then they sold it to the New Haven, and New Haven added on the freight house. But I don't know the exact dates for that.
You can see why there was railroads everywhere. They were pretty well developed, and that truck was the modern technology
Yep.
over the road transportation. We didn't carry very much, and it wasn't particularly reliable.
And the roads weren't great, you know. If you want to see what it was like driving then, take your GPS and tell it you want to go the shortest, not the fastest, but the shortest route. And it will take you on these little back roads that you wouldn't believe, and it'll take you 4 times as long to get where you're going. But that was the only way you drove in those days. Here it is, 1979. I took this slide. I wish I had known to take more, but mill buildings were still there. The freight house was still partly there. And there's the other side of the office, which you don't normally see now because there's a building right here. And there it is, more or less today, a couple of years ago. So somebody lives there now. Looking the other way from the top of the Windham Manufacturing. So this is the entrance to the Railroad Museum now. There's the brick row buildings, which are still there. I see the steam train coming into town. So the Railroad Museum is back in here. There's the old cemetery, so we're right next to that.
You're looking south and west, or?
Northwest, kind of, or
Northwest.
west. So there's the Willimantic River.
Is that before the airline trail, or is?
Oh yeah, I mean, the airline was still in
No
place.
footbridge or yet, right?
This would be the airline itself. I think that's probably the bridge where the airline crosses over from Columbia to Lebanon, and which is now part of the airline trail. This was the other roundhouse in town, Columbia Junction, 1924, turntable, brick roundhouse, chimney on the top. So this one was leveled sometime, this is 1924, sometime after this it was leveled. It doesn't look like they're using it much at this point. So probably it's close to that time. But this is the grounds of the Railroad Museum currently. And here we have another fan trip. They were popular. There's the old Willimantic Cemetery. This is turning on, the train is turning on the Y, so he's going over the bridge to Lebanon and come back. So right in here is where the Railroad Museum is today and where the roundhouse would have been.
So was that heading there or north?
Yeah, so they probably, yeah, so they look like they're going forward, so they probably come into town this way, dropped their passengers off, came back out here, went across the Y that way, and now they're coming this way to turn around to head back north again.
How often did engines need servicing in the roundhouses?
Yes.
Every 100 miles or?
I think they did it by time more than miles, so they had like monthly, quarterly, 6-month and yearly services, and they'd have to do, I mean, they were serviced in the roundhouse every night, right? These were really high maintenance pieces of equipment, so when they came in off running a train or for the evening, they would go into the roundhouse and be checked over, the fire dumped and cleaned out and all of that. I mean, that's why, part of why they switched to diesels, because these things were so high maintenance. But then they had periodic inspections to make sure that the tubes were good, the firebox was good, all the oiling points were, bearings were well maintained. So they were really high maintenance. Now, they improved, right? So part of the reason why they tore down those 2 roundhouses in Willimantic was because by the 1920s, they had improved enough they could run a lot further and a lot longer between servicing. So they didn't need all the facilities they had built originally. But they were still very high maintenance, and there's also efficiency. I heard a talk by somebody one time, he said, when a steam engine was running on coal, it used 6% of the potential BTUs in that coal were translated to motion. All the rest was radiated out or went up through the smokestack or whatever. They went to what they called superpower steam. They went from 6 to 7.5%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's like a 25% improvement, so that's really pretty good. Diesel electric locomotive uses 30%, gets 30% of the potential BTUs translated into motion. So it's like 5 times as efficient.
So around 1900, would there have been thousands, millions of roundhouses in the States?
Probably thousands. I would say thousands. Probably not. Probably never got to quite a million. But you know, every major railroad would have multiples of them. You know, by 1940, New Haven had them in New Haven and Reedville and Boston and down near New York border and a few others, but that was Providence and an Oak Point, New York. But that would be about it.
Thank you.
It would every time.
Well, so later there were facilities where they didn't have those options, like Midway Yard down on the shoreline. I don't believe they ever had a roundhouse there, but they would have had an ash pit. They had a coal tower as well as water facilities, so they could refuel the locomotive. You get water all over the place. There were, and probably were, millions of water tanks down around the country to keep the water topped up in the steam engines. But there were places where they had coal towers in the Midwest on the main line because they would run out of coal. They weren't ready for servicing. There was no facility nearby, but they needed to refuel.
Out in the middle of nowhere out there.
Yeah, Illinois, places like that. New York even in a few places. So here's what we found when we cut the brush at the site of the turntable in the roundhouse. There's the turntable pit, no bridge. There are the maintenance pits within the roundhouse, and there's part of the foundation wall. So that's what we started with. Had drawings, made more detailed drawings, got grants and hired, I mean, that wasn't something that we could build with volunteer labor, so that we had to pay people to build it. And we rebuilt the roundhouse and found a turntable bridge in Massachusetts and brought it in place. And this is what you'll see if you go there today. So some of these stones are original over the doors with the number of the stall and the pits, but that's it. The rest of it's all newly constructed. I won't say it's exactly like the original. It's concrete block inside. The supports are steam or steel where they were probably originally timber. So it's built to modern standards, but it looks like the original roundhouse that was there.
Now, the size of what the engines would go under,
they were small. They were like little 440s, 260s, things like that. So those Pacific locomotives that we saw in some of the earlier shots, I'm not sure they would have fit in here.
280s or?
New Haven didn't have too many 280s. They went from 260s up to, they jumped up to 282s and 462s. So I don't know if they could have held anything bigger than a 260 in here or not, but maybe. But they would have been the smallest of the Pacifics, the I-1 and I-2 class. The I-4s we saw on the fan trips, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't fit in. I think the tender would have stuck out of the bay if they had gone into this. So I don't know for sure. I haven't measured. Anyway, so here's an example of what we have at the museum. So this is a 44-tonner General Electric switch engine. It's painted in the New Haven colors, although it's from the Long Island Railroad originally. This is a 45-ton General Electric switch engine from the New Haven Terminal Railroad. Rail bus from the Maine Central. Speeder car from the Narragansett Pier Railroad in Rhode Island. 25-ton General Electric switcher. That was used in building Millstone. And this is an 040 steam switcher, Baldwin. It was at a factory in Massachusetts, and then for a while it went to Essex and into a trolley museum in Massachusetts before coming to us. It should have a saddle tank. We have the saddle tank, but we have to finish cosmetic restoration. Probably won't ever get it fully restored unless somebody's got a couple million they want to donate to the cause. But that's our one steam engine at the moment. It was fairly late. It was built in 1935. It was Baldwin's attempt to compete with the diesel electrics. So it had roller bearings. It had oil pump fire, so you could run it with one person like some of the diesel electrics. Also an interesting point, I said this was a 45-tonner, and this is a 44-tonner. Why did they make two locomotives, 1 ton difference in weight? Because the agreements with the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers said any locomotive 45 tons or greater requires a fireman. 45 tonner is the biggest, 44 tonner is the biggest one you can make that one man can run. So that's what GE did. So in conclusion, these are some of the sources. If you want to find out more, I have some of these books here that you can take a look at. Best Overall History, Connecticut Railroads, and Illustrated History by Greg M. Turner and Melachan Jacobus. That covers all the railroads in the state, including Central Vermont and all the predecessor lines to New Haven. Central Vermont, the South End, Remembering the Banana Belt. That's specifically about the Central Vermont from Palmer to New London. TylerCityStation.info is the website that has all Connecticut stations, very detailed information. ThreadCity.com for Willimantic sources in general. Connecticut Eastern Railroad Museum, talked about. If you haven't been there and you're at all interested in trains, please come. We're open Saturdays and Sundays, May till October. New Haven Railroad Historical and Technical Association. A lot of these photographs came from them. We have an extensive photo library, over 11,000 images cataloged so far. I've been volunteering to help catalog them for about 10 years now. And the Central Vermont Railway Historical Society. Railroad Museum is open from 10 to 4 on Saturdays, 12 to 4 on Sundays until beginning of October.
Thank you.
So that concludes the presentation. I have more material if anybody wants to see it, but I didn't want to run too long. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned something.